All right, let's get started. I've created a new Unity project, and inside of that project, I saved my scene inside of the scenes folder. And what we'll do in this lesson is bring in a few models and files from Blender and also other files that we will be using in our game, and we'll set up a basic arrangement. Then on the next lesson, we'll make our player move. What I'll do now is open up Blender and show you how I export the models. Blender is a free 3D modeling package, and covering Blender is enough for its own course, and in fact we have a course on Blender, but I do want to show you, in case you are a Blender user or you are interested in using Blender, how I export my models into Unity. So I've got this block here, which is a terrain block that we will use for different things in our game. It will be used for the platforms that we'll be jumping on, and also for I'll use it as well for the terrain that extends to the horizon. So the first thing that I do before exporting the model, in this case I've set up the anchor point to be on the very top of the model, so that then on Unity we can set the height, the position of this to be 0, and it will be just ground level. So we don't have to worry about that. The other thing that I've done is I've applied all the rotations and scales, which is something that you can do with when selecting the model and pressing Ctrl or Command A, and then you apply the rotation or the scale. Other than that, when I select the model, I also go to this inverted triangle here, and I make sure to add a UV map, so that then we can do light baking if we decide to do so with this model. All right, so in order for us to export this, to bring this into Unity, I'm going to select the model and go to File, Export, FBX, which is a file format that that can be imported into Unity. Then I'm gonna go and find the corresponding folder where my project is located, and I'll go and create. Whoops, I didn't mean to export it right there. So let's do that again. So I'm back into that folder, and I want to create a new folder here, which I'm gonna call models, and then I'm gonna go inside of that folder. Then I'm gonna make sure to click here on selected objects, and also to have let's zoom in a little bit, to have this button clicked. Then I'm going to give this a name, and I'm going to call this terrain block. So that is this first model that we are exporting. Then I also have a tree that I would like to export. So same thing, I'm going to select my tree, go to File, Export, FBX, and we are already on the same folder as before. Selected object is checked. This button here is selected as well, and this is going to be called tree. What else do we have here? We have these kinds of giant grass, similar to the ones that you can find in Mario games. So we're gonna use that one as well. So I'm gonna go and export this file. I think these are giant grass elements, but I'm not sure. So I'll just call this giant grass. Same options as before. And now I want to have some mountains, some terrain in the far distance. So one option would be to export this model and position it in Unity very far away from our player. But if you think about it, there are already here quite a few vertices and triangles, and in virtual reality, you want to keep the geometry of your game as lean as possible. And since this will be placed very far away, we can, instead of exporting the model, we can export an image and then use that image in our game as a far away image. Sort of like how they used to do movies, where they would have a big image for the background. In, say, a Western movie, there would be a big image of a landscape painted by hand. And so what do I need here to export that as an image? I need a camera, and I need a light. In this case, this is a sunlight. So if I press the if I press the F12 button, that shows me what the camera is looking at. And in this case, the camera, I've positioned it to the right, in the right position, in the position that I want, so that it looks at the landscape. Then in this side area, if we go and find the the render area here, and then if you scroll down to shading, then in alpha I've selected transparent so that we can have this transparent background. What you do then is you go and save this as an image. So image here, save as image, and I've already saved it here as distant mountains. And what I did then with that image was just to open it on another free program called GIMP, because I'll show you what that image will look like. And then I selected just part of that image and exported it again. So this is the image that was exported from Blender. And what I did then was just to select a smaller version of this image, and I saved this as a new image, so that this is the image that we bring into Unity. And that image I've exported it here already. It's called Distant Mountains Smaller. So let's bring that into Unity as well. So back in Unity, we can see that we have all of our models inside of models. And inside of assets, I'll create another folder called textures, and inside of that folder in that folder I'll bring in my exported image file. Now clicking on my image file, there is something else that we need to do, which is to select here texture type sprite 2D and UI, and that is because we'll put this in a canvas, in a world space canvas, and we don't want any changes to be made to that image. And if we don't select this option, the transparency area will have some pixels showing around them. All right, so now we have everything that we need here. Let's set up a basic arrangement. Now, what about our apply what we changed? Yes. So what about our player? In virtual reality, we'll never modify the transform of the camera directly. In this case, we want our player to be moving. So what we'll do is create a containing object. Will be a create empty object, and that empty object I'm going to rename to player, and then we bring the camera in and we place it inside of that player, so that then we can modify the parent object but not the camera itself. The camera itself, its position and rotation is something that the user itself, the player itself, will modify. So if you look around, that will change the transform of your camera. But the analogy with real life is that you can step into a car and that car will drive you. So the player would be sort of like the car or a containing object. My player, I will position it in a coordinate 0 in the origin. And the camera itself, I'll position it in the origin of the player as well, but I will give it a bit of a height so that it can simulate the height of a real person. And now what I'll do is add the terrain that we brought in. So I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna drag this terrain block, and I'm gonna start by positioning it in the origin, so that this will go right under our camera. This terrain block will be used to represent the running track, and then we'll also use it to represent both sides, the landscape that extends to the horizon. The cube itself is actually 2 Unity units on each side, just so that we know that. And I'm going to begin by extending it alongside the running track so that the running track reaches the horizon. We want to have an idea of how long it needs to be for it to reach the horizon, because we want to be able to extend this terrain to the horizon in all directions or close to the horizon. When we're playing the game itself, the running track will be generated dynamically, so that different blocks will be created and we have to jump in between them. But for the sides, those will be static. Those will be, they're not going to be moving. And so the terrain itself will go, the running track itself will go towards the z-axis. That is the direction to which we'll be running. And you can see that the z-axis is this way. We have local coordinates here, so I'm going to toggle to global coordinates so that I can see to which direction I want to go. And now what I'll do is scale this so that we can get an idea of how far we need to go in order to reach the horizon. So I'm I'm scaling and scaling, and the scale reaches, let's say, this number here, like 100 and 140, I think will be a good number. I'm going to round it up, and that allows us to reach the horizon on both ways. Since the cube is 2 units of length, when we scale by 140, the total length of this is actually 280, and we are in the middle of that. So it seems it seems then that what we need on each side is a 140, which means that the cube on the side, when we look to the left or to the right, we need to extend 140 units that way. So what I'll do is duplicate the terrain block and move it to the side, and I know then that the scale here, I'll leave the scale on Y in 140, but I'll increase the scale here on X to half of that number, because that should be enough to get me to the horizon. And now the positioning of the cube itself, you can do it by hand, and you can also calculate the value. I think the value should be 71, if I'm not wrong, since we are starting from the middle here, and it is 1, and then plus 70 on each side. It should be 71. And then we can select, let's see, we can select the running track and the cube, and they are both using different space here. So I think that is the correct amount here. Let me just be sure that is the case. Yeah. Okay. So I've got one of the sides then, and what I'll do now is just duplicate this and position it in minus 71. So I'm gonna type here minus 71, and that's it for the grass itself. I can go and I can select my camera, and I can rotate the camera and make it look around, and it looks like it's reaching the horizon. It could even be a little bit longer, but this will be fine. What I want to do now is bring in the mountains. So back in here, what I'll do is create a world space canvas and place these mountains in that world space canvas and position the space canvas on the edge of the screen, and then duplicate that and do the same on the other side. So let's begin here by creating I can go and create a canvas and then a raw image, and I can go and create a raw image right away, and that will give me both the canvas and the image. Now, selecting the image, I can drag the distant mountain to the texture field here, and then as you can see, the canvas itself is quite huge, and it is rotated the wrong way. But before we change the rotation, let's make sure that it is a world canvas. So I've selected the canvas, and then I make sure to select here world space, so that our canvas has a transform like everything else, and it is positioned in the world. Now I'm going to rotate this about Y in 90 degrees. I'm going to do that in here. So I'm going to type in 90, and so that we can see our landscape from this direction. And we now clearly need to adjust the size of this thing. So what I'll do is press F to select to focus my the canvas, and then press 2D. And oh well, actually I can't do it like that because it's rotated. So I'll select just manually move the image to where I want it to be positioned. The canvas itself doesn't really matter. What I'm interested in is the image. So I'm gonna manually position the image like somewhere there, and then I can go and with this tool here, I can go and change the dimensions of my image. And so I'm gonna do this in a manual way until it looks good. I think it needs to, let's zoom out. I think it needs to be a little bit inside, a little bit down, like so. And we can drag our, we can rotate our camera about Y and see if it looks good, like it's like some mountains in the distance. I think they should be a bit smaller. So I'm going to go again here and make the mountains just a little bit smaller, like so, so that it appears like it's really far away. All right, so we got that, and then I can easily just duplicate that canvas and move it all the way to the other side. So it doesn't have to be at the very edge, and they both sides don't need to look exactly the same. But in this other side, I think let's go and see what this looks like if I rotate the camera. Um, I think that is good. That is okay. So I've got the mountains now on each one of the sides. When we are running, what we will do is move the terrain so that it is following us. So for that, I'm going to position all the things that I'm gonna call distant or distant lands or distant areas. I'm gonna place them all in an empty object so that then I can make that empty object follow the player. So I'm gonna create here, and I'm gonna call this, let's call this distant land, and this will be used for the terrain blocks themselves, so both of these, the big ones, and also for both canvases. And there we go. So what we'll do is that when the player moves, this whole empty object will follow the player. And then we will be adding trees, but the trees themselves, they will not follow the player, so they will kind of pass by us and eventually disappear in the distance, and we'll be spawning new trees further ahead. So that is the basic arrangement, and now we're ready to start working on the running part of the game, on the player running, and that will include, as I mentioned, these distant lands following us in the game.